Anyone who experienced the aftermath of UFC 273 will no doubt be aware that there is a very interesting discussion brewing within the MMA community. Call it recency bias or a very credible argument worth making, but once Alexander Volkanovski managed to move past Max Holloway, at least for now, and began to pick off some of the rest of the featherweight top 5, a lot of fans really started to reposition his status within the sport in their minds. This brought about re-examinations of his earlier high-level wins, the victories over Chad Mendes and in particular, Jose Aldo, which was of course helped by the continued success that the legendary Brazilian has been able to sustain at bantamweight in the time since. Now, where a lot of fans would have been angered by Volk's position as champion due to his pair of victories over the well-loved Holloway, even if the first one wasn't that close, after 2 title defenses that saw Alex the Great given the chance to be exactly that, we're finally starting to see this guy get his dues. And if you thought that win over Brian Ortega was impressive, he left us with little doubt as to who the champion is, with a truly masterful victory over the Korean Zombie at UFC 273. And look, the circumstances that brought us that fight and deprived us of a third matchup against Max Holloway were pretty unfortunate. And realistically, Chan Sung Jung was shown to be several levels off being a real threat to the champion. But I am a firm believer in the healthy management of champions. Even if it was accidental, I do think that there's a lot to be learned from the blueprint set out by boxing. How each challenger isn't necessarily the type of fighter who will trouble the reigning champion. Now, of course, boxing takes this and goes way too far, putting on far too many bouts that are devoid of substance. But in moderation, seeing a champion getting the chance to perform in a fight that isn't overly pivotal to their legacy does allow a certain necessary level of growth, both to their skill set and to the fans' perception of them. And that, for me, is what Volkanovski was able to get out of that matchup with Jung. It wasn't a tune-up fight, but it was an opportunity for the champion to keep his gloves warm, to earn another notch on his title reign in a fight that, while not being without its risks, wasn't a career-altering battle with Max Holloway. And now, because of the time that is going to exist between fights 2 and 3, due to the fact that Max has fought and beaten Yair Rodriguez and Calvin Kattar, and Volkanovski has gone through Brian Ortega and Korean Zombie, I would argue that the third matchup between these two is bigger than it ever would have been otherwise. Both of these guys have seen their stock hit unprecedented levels, and both appear to be in the absolute prime of their careers. So yeah, obviously I think that's the fight to make without question. A pair of athletes at the top of a division who have gone an equally stunning 2-0 in their last 2 fights since their most recent meeting. And if you watch this channel often, you'll know that I regard the second matchup between Volkanovski and Holloway as one of the greatest and most nuanced displays of high-level MMA we've ever seen. Couple that with the fact that both are clearly better than they were then, and we have ourselves a fight. But the purpose of today's video isn't to sit here daydreaming about how incredible a matchup that would be. Instead, I'd rather address one of the burning questions that has been a constant in the MMA community ever since UFC 273. Is Alexander Volkanovski the pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet? Now, of course, this is a loaded question full of recency bias, furthered by the fact that we haven't seen Kamaru Usman in the last 6 months, and when we did, he was going to a narrow decision against his greatest rival, Colby Covington. And trust me, as easy as it is to forget just how good a fighter is due to not being bombarded by the unavoidable pre- and post-event media circus that surrounds any recent appearance, a lot can change in one fight. And if Usman were to go out there and absolutely smoke Leon Edwards, who knows where the public would stand on this one. But based on what we know for sure about both guys, there is little doubt in my mind that these are the top 2. During fight week, I put out a video where I inserted Petr Yan's name into that conversation, and believe me, as much as some of you jumped into the comment section on that video directly after UFC 273 to tell me to take him out, that's not really how I see it. Sure, Aljamain Sterling got the win, but skill for skill, I would still consider Yan to be one of the best in the world. And obviously there are others who deserve mentions, but I won't get into them now. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content and would like to stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads, be sure to subscribe to the channel now because, as you all know, we are the only channel on MMA YouTube that used to weigh 467 metric tons during our days as a front row back in our home country of Australia when we used to play rugby, before we then slimmed down to the featherweight frame you now see. Also, we recently set up a Patreon account, so if you want to help support the channel, the link is in the description. Anyway, for this video, it's all about Usman and Volkanovski, their strengths, their resumes, the general aura they bring to their respective divisions. Because for me, I think the title of pound for pound #1 number one, while totally open to your own personal interpretation, I do see it, above all other things, as a position filled by the one fighter who is at the peak of the sport right now, in terms of their position as champion, how watertight that is, how they relate and compare to their competition, the skills and the progression of those skills they bring to the octagon, as well as the strength and depth of the names on their resume. And as I outlined before, no fighter in the UFC, I believe, has a win as good as Volkanovski's over Holloway. Sure, these fights were narrow, but if you're talking about the levels that a fighter needs to reach just to get marginally ahead of a fighter like the former champion Blessed, that for me is a true indicator of greatness. Volkanovski did what others drown attempting to do, and if it didn't come across as overly flashy or eye-catching, that's because it wasn't. In fact, there was no room for that kind of approach, or at least there wasn't in Volkanovski's skill set at that point in time. He's a fighter whose strengths lie in his subtleties, how he can make a competitor as active and thoroughly enjoyable as Holloway appear far more stagnant than usual, and that is a special level of talent. Along with those two victories over Holloway, we also have his battering of Chad Mendes, his complete and total shutdown of Jose Aldo, his decimation of Brian Ortega, and his most recent dominant effort against Chan Sung Jung. So how do I compare those to Usman's best wins? His duo over Colby Covington, his knockout of Gilbert Burns, his absolute mauling of Tyron Woodley, the two-fight shutout of Jorge Masvidal that culminated in an instantly iconic finish, earlier wins over Rafael dos Anjos, Leon Edwards, Damian Maia, even a younger Sean Strickland. Couple that with his 5 title defenses and the clear improvements and rounding out of his game that he has shown, and it is easy to make the argument that the Nigerian Nightmare is the pound-for-pound king at this point in time. But does that make it true for me? Well, not necessarily. To be honest, my own jury is still out on this one. I don't think that Usman has a win quite as good as the victory over the legendary Holloway, but Volkanovski's own resume clearly isn't as deep as Kamaru's. As far as the eye test goes, I just don't think that Usman ties the entire MMA skill set together quite as well as Volkanovski. That's not to say that he's not well-rounded, but in the featherweight king I see a marginally better representation of the full package. Usman brings a long reign atop the welterweight division that doesn't look like it's going to be ended anytime soon. A level of dominance that has seen him double back over some of his past victories in rematches, potentially cleaning out the division, or at least for now. But I would argue that featherweight is a much stronger weight class around that upper tier. So look, for every reason I can give for Usman being pound for pound king, I can just as easily throw one out that serves up a strong argument for Volkanovski. And that is the thing about these discussions. It truly is a matter of personal preference. I could make the argument to you that Israel Adesanya possesses the single greatest grasp of a single realm of MMA combat in the entire sport, with his control and understanding of striking being the most comprehensive tool any pound-for-pound candidate has in their arsenal. Just as I could say that in a scenario where an opening or opportunity is given, there is no fighter in the sport as good as Charles Oliveira when it comes to punishing you for it. So as far as my own personal pound-for-pound vote goes, my own angle on things comes into play in a way that I might not even be able to fully articulate. But based on that feeling, I do see Alexander Volkanovski as the single greatest example of a mixed martial artist on the planet today. And on the back of his overall game, his progression of the MMA skill set, the names he has shut down, that's what I'm looking for in a pound-for-pound king. And though Kamaru Usman is all of those things in his own way, I can't help but edge the reigning featherweight king ahead of him by a narrow margin for now. So set up the Holloway fight if you can, Dana, and if not, I would absolutely love to see Volkanovski put that pound-for-pound status to the test at lightweight. Either way, it has been a slow burn, but there are certainly only a handful of fighters in the sport I enjoy watching as much as Alexander Volkanovski. But where do you rate the UFC featherweight champion within the pound-for-pound argument? And if he does decide to move up to 155 pounds, who do you think would make for a fitting opponent? Do let us know your opinions in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads. Thanks for watching.